In this section, we will be reviewing and going over measurable annual goals and progress monitoring.
And the agenda for this module includes Measurable Annual Goals 101 and writing good measurable annual goals. And the objective is, given a case study, participants will have a better understanding of how to develop an appropriate measurable annual goal, including all required goal components using assessment data. Measurable annual goals are at the core of a student's IEP. They must provide a clear description of the skills the student needs in order to access, participate, and make progress in the general education curriculum. The goals must relate directly to the areas of need identified in the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance section of the IEP. Areas of need are determined by analyzing multiple sources of information, including evaluations, classroom-based assessments, student observations, and input from parents. For reference, let's take a look at a student case study that has been used throughout this course. Please access the Sean case study that is provided as a resource within this module. Now take a few minutes and review the Sean case study. While reviewing, please identify and highlight Sean's areas of need and any information that supports why each area is considered a need. This will be helpful as we continue through the presentation. And please feel free to pause the presentation at this time to review the Sean case study. Now that you have had the time to look over the case study, were you able to identify all of Sean's needs? You should have also been able to find information that will be included in the present levels of Sean's IEP, which supports the identification of his specific needs. Let's do a quick review. On this slide, you will see an example of what Sean's present levels of academic and functional performance may look like. As you can see, highlighted in yellow are the specific assessments used to gain information on Sean's academic and functional performance, as well as transition assessments that provide information addressing his post-school goals. Using these assessments provided useful information in determining Sean's strengths and needs. For this example, Sean's specific deficits or needs have been bolded and underlined. As you can see, based on assessment, Sean has multiple needs, including solving multiple step problems, organization and writing mechanics, and he needs to improve his self-advocacy skills. Using assessment to identify specific needs is the crucial starting point in writing measurable annual goals.
Now we are going to take a look at a few important guidelines that need to be considered when preparing to write a measurable annual goal. Measurable annual goals should be created with the intention to build skills based on the student's current needs. Needs or student deficits are identified in the present levels of the IEP. Goals should also be prioritized, focusing on 3 to 5 goals at most. Prioritizing means to identify the student's most glaring needs and writing measurable annual goals for each of them. For example, a student may have 10 needs that are identified in the present levels of the IEP. If you think about it, it's going to be quite difficult to create and monitor 10 measurable annual goals successfully for one student. Instead of writing 10 separate goals, it is recommended that you prioritize the 3 to 5 most significant student needs and focus on building those skills first. And then measurable annual goals project student performance at the end of 1 year of instruction. We are not looking at how the student will be doing 2 or 3 years down the road. We are only projecting how the student will be doing at the end of the current IEP year. When writing a measurable annual goal, you should always start with the student's baseline skill. This information can be located in the present level section of the IEP. And finally, make sure goals are written so you can actually progress monitor them. Well-written goals contain measurable, countable data, which allows accurate progress monitoring.
While it is important to understand the guidelines of what a well-written measurable annual goal should be, it is just as important to understand what a well-written measurable annual goal is not. In some instances, there is confusion when writing a measurable annual goal, and unfortunately what may seem like a good goal may ultimately not be a compliant measurable annual goal after all. So let's take a look at what a measurable annual goal is not. Measurable annual goals are not curriculum, objectives, or subject area lessons. They are not grade averages, test scores, or passing a course. For example, it is not appropriate to write a goal that says that the student will pass Algebra 1 during this school year. Remember, goals need to have measurable, countable data that can be progress monitored on a variety of occasions during the school year. And they are not the same as post-secondary goals or post-school goals, which address a student's post-school training, employment, and independent living. Post-school goals address what the student plans on doing after graduation, while measurable annual goals are what is being done currently in school to help increase a student's academic and functional needs. Now we are going to be providing some examples of goals that may look like good measurable annual goals, but in reality are missing the mark. These non-goals or bad goals can be referenced and compared with the good compliant goals that we will discuss later in this module to help you gain a better understanding of what a good measurable annual goal actually looks like. Let's take a look at example number 1. Measurable annual goals are not used for monitoring course grades. Take a look at the example goal provided. In Algebra 1, William will get a grade of 85% or higher in 4 consecutive marking periods to pass the course. Remember, measurable annual goals are put in place to help build a student's unique deficits, which means the sole purpose of the measurable annual goal is to help the student improve upon these areas of need. Monitoring grades is not helping a student build a particular set of skills, such as reading or math, which confirms that this example is not considered a good measurable annual goal. Example number 2. Measurable annual goals are not used to monitor activities. Let's take a look at the example goal below. During the school year, Lisa will go on college visits to help her decide what school she would like to attend following graduation. Although students taking part in activities that support their transition plan is crucial, it is important to understand that activities are not measurable, so they cannot be considered a measurable annual goal. Remember, a measurable annual goal must have measurable, countable data that can be progress monitored. It also must focus on building a student's unique deficits. With that said, this confirms that this is not an example of a measurable annual goal. Example number 3. Measurable annual goals are not to be written in broad terms that can't be progress monitored. So looking at the example, given checklists, Allison will complete most of her assignments on time during the week, and this will be monitored quarterly. So at first glance, this example may look like a well-written measurable annual goal. It has all the components of a goal. However, when taking a deeper dive, you start to notice that this goal is almost impossible to progress monitor. The wording is too broad and subjective. For example, what does most of her assignments mean? Is it 1 assignment a week that she must turn in? Is it 4 assignments a week? Also, Allison is given checklists to keep track of her assignments. But what type of checklists are these? Different checklists keep track of different things. So you need to be a little bit more specific there as well. Another concern is the time frame of when Allison will be progress monitored. So in the example it says she will be monitored quarterly. Even though you may be doing good progress monitoring on multiple occasions throughout the marking period, the term quarterly indicates that progress monitoring will only be done once per marking period or quarter. This may lead to some misunderstanding to those reading the IEP. This example is a great segue into the next part of this module, where we will be taking a look at a goal much like this one and turning it into a good measurable annual goal. We will discuss how to create goals that are clear and concise, that focus on building skills, and can be easily progress monitored. Okay, so after reviewing those examples of non-measurable annual goals or bad goals, we just want to refocus what a good measurable annual goal should be before we move on. And remember, a good measurable annual goal should build skills, it needs to be prioritized, and it needs to include progress monitoring. In order for the student to be able to access, participate, and make progress in the general curriculum and the life of the school community, and progress towards his or her post-secondary goals, a measurable annual goal must build skills. Goals must focus on an area of need that will make the biggest difference to the student. Here are some skills that might be needed by secondary students. And as we look at this slide, this is not an exhaustive list, but some of the skills that you may be seeing that need to be addressed are academic skills, time management skills, social skills, self-determination skills, and possibly travel skills. So now that we have given an overview of what a measurable annual goal is and is not, we are going to move on to talk about the required components of a well-written measurable annual goal. And before we do that, I'd like to point out that this directly connects to Indicator 13 checklist item number 8 and file review question number 292C.
Now that we have given an overview of what a measurable annual goal is and is not, we are going to move on to talk about the required components of a well-written measurable annual goal. A well-written measurable annual goal contains 4 required components: a condition, student name, clearly defined behavior, and performance criteria. In this section, we will clearly define each component while also providing examples to consider when writing measurable annual goals for your students. We will also be providing examples of measurable annual goals with all required components in place. Component 1 is the condition. The condition describes the situation in which the student will perform the behavior. Some examples of conditions can include, but are not limited to, when using grade level passages, when given visual cues, using a self-monitoring checklist, when using passages from content area classes. Now, obviously, this is not an exhaustive list, as I mentioned before, and there are many situations in which the student will perform the behavior, which you will include in the measurable annual goal. Component 2 is the student name. This component is as straightforward as it gets. To satisfy this component, all that needs to be done is to make sure to include the student's first name in the goal. Always make sure you double check when entering the student's name. Even though this component is simple, it is just as simple to possibly make a mistake and enter the wrong student's name when creating the goal. Unfortunately, this is known to have occurred more than you would assume, so be sure to double check when finalizing the measurable annual goal. Component 3 is the clearly defined behavior. This component of a well-written goal specifically describes the target behavior in measurable and observable terms, using action verbs to state what the student will do. The use of vague terms such as understand, recognize, discover, that cannot be observed directly or counted should not be used. So some examples to consider when entering the clearly defined behavior are to say, to print, to write, to point, solve, to name, to rank, and so on and so forth. There are so many different clearly defined behaviors. There's so many options out there. Just as with the condition, this is not an exhaustive list of clearly defined behavior terms. However, just be sure to make sure that the clearly defined behavior is observable and countable, and you can actually clearly see the student doing it, so that it makes it easier to progress monitor. And then component 4 is the performance criteria. And the performance criteria consists of 3 parts. It is the how well you want to see the student do the behavior, how consistently you want to see the behavior done, and how frequently progress monitored you are going to monitor the behavior. So the how well, or the criterion level, indicates the performance level the student must demonstrate. Some examples of how well are the percentage of time, the accuracy, with how many or fewer errors, and then words, digits that are correct per minute. So how well do you want to see the student perform this behavior? Criterion 2 is the number of times to demonstrate mastery, or the how consistently. So some examples to think of are 3 out of 5 random trials, 5 consecutive trials, and 4 out of 5 trials. So how consistently do you want the student to perform this behavior. And then how frequently are you going to progress monitor the behavior? And that's criterion level 3, which is the evaluation schedule. So we want to indicate how frequently the student will be assessed and the method of assessment. So are we going to assess the student daily, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly? It all is going to be individualized to the student, obviously, but the main thing here is we want to set up an evaluation schedule that offers multiple progress monitoring points throughout the marking period. Now that we have reviewed all the required components, we will now take a look at an example of a well-written measurable annual goal. Take a few moments and review the example. While reviewing, identify each component of the measurable annual goal. You can do this any way you choose. You can do it either by highlighting, underlining, naming, but just take a few moments and identify each area or each component of this measurable annual goal. After taking some time, we will review the goal together. Please take as much time as needed and feel free to pause the presentation to review the goals. When you are ready to resume, please press play. So now that you've had the opportunity to review the example provided, how did you do? Were you able to identify each component? Let's review the example together. So as you can see, the goal has been provided again here, and this time it is color-coded, with each component being given a specific color. So the condition is identified using pink, the student name using the color green, clearly defined behavior using the color yellow, and performance criteria using the color purple. So take a look and review again and see how you did. As you can see, this activity shows the significance of making sure all required components are included when writing a measurable annual goal. The example goals are clear and concise. Reading them, anyone involved with the student will know exactly what is expected of the student, while allowing the IEP team members and any teacher and professional staff to understand if the student is making progress toward his or her goal or not. A well-written measurable annual goal allows the IEP team to make accurate, data-driven decisions that are crucial when addressing the student's program. This is why it is crucial to have a clear and measurable present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. Only then will you be able to write clear and measurable goals. Before we move on, we'd like to share an excellent resource that can be used when writing measurable annual goals. This graphic is called Measurable Annual Goals at a Glance, and this resource breaks down each component while also giving examples. It is also a great way of cross-checking your goals before you finalize them in the IEP. Now that we have covered the what of a measurable annual goal and its components, we are going to walk you through the actual process of writing a goal. We will start with gathering helpful information from the present levels to identify and prioritize the student's needs. We will then write a measurable annual goal that supports building the student's skills while making sure we include all the required components of a well-written goal. For this activity, we are going to use the Allison case study. So we'd like you to access Allison's case study. We're going to be reviewing Allison's assessment and needs, just like we did with the Sean case study earlier in the section. And ultimately, we are going to create a measurable annual goal based on that assessment and needs. So let's begin by taking a look at some background information about Allison. Allison is an 18-year-old junior that has been identified as having a specific learning disability that affects both her reading comprehension and written expression. Her strengths include maintaining a B average, good interpersonal skills, and she's able to utilize her accommodations while also being able to describe all of her accommodations to her teachers. She also has good oral expression. Areas that Allison continues to struggle with include having a clear understanding of post-secondary options that match her interests and skills while also struggling with gaining confidence about her future. Allison also continues to struggle with time management and organization skills. So when reviewing Allison's present levels, Information is present that supports her needs in the area of time management and organization skills. In the present levels, you will see that it states that Allison struggles meeting assignment deadlines and needs to improve organizational skills to prepare for college expectations. And these are based on assessments such as teacher reports, parent interviews, and student interviews. Because this goal is definitely her most substantial need, we will focus on building her time management organization skills by creating a measurable annual goal for this need. So based on the information that we gained from the present levels, here is the measurable annual goal that was created to help Allison build on her time management and organization skills. And the goal is, given organizational checklists created by her teachers, Allison will submit 90% of her assignments on time in 4 out of 5 consecutive weekly reviews. And as you can see, this goal is clear and concise. It can be easily progress monitored, and it also contains all the required components of a well-written measurable annual goal: the condition, the student name, the clearly defined behavior, and the 3 performance criteria components.
Once the measurable annual goal is created and agreed upon by the IEP team, the goal must be inserted into the IEP in the Goals and Objectives section. And as you can see, for this example, we inserted the goal that was just created for Allison. Also, it is important not to forget to fill in the corresponding boxes that go along with the measurable annual goal. So we need to describe how the student's progress will be measured. And in this example, progress will be measured during weekly reviews. We also need to describe when reports on progress will be provided to parents. And this should be done at least quarterly throughout the school year, or whenever a parent requests a report. And here's another resource for writing a good measurable annual goal. And as you can see here, this is the formula for writing a measurable annual goal, and it includes each component, and it gives examples for each area of the measurable annual goal, or each component of the measurable annual goal. So just another resource to help you or assist you when writing measurable annual goals. And before moving on to the next module, please complete the quiz for this section, which is located within this module for measurable annual goals.